Hi everybody, welcome back to FeedbackLoop. I'm Joey.
And I'm Jeremy.
And this week we're capping off a riveting 5-week run of folk punk with Ramshackle Glory's Live the Dream. And, it's a very near and dear album to me. And Jeremy's listened to it this past week, so pray for him.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. This is the third Pat the Money album. So it's kind of like it's both the end of our folk punk trip, but also the end of our Pat the Bunny trilogy, I suppose, for now, which is it's exciting. It's fun getting to know how these albums have helped shape you into the person you are today that is hosting this podcast at this time.
Yeah, it's like just I don't know, getting to listen to these three albums. I mean, really all five are good albums, but listening to these three albums in specific have just been it's been a treat this past few weeks. Them. Yeah, and like because I mean I listen to them all the time, but at this point it's also they're kind of just music that I put on because they're a lot of time it's background. I've been getting to like really take time like I used to with the albums, and it's been nice.
Yeah, it's been fun. I'll say that much at the very least. It's interesting to like kind of see the evolution of Pat the Bunny, but also to like learn how much of an impact it's had on you and whatnot. I have a feeling, I have a sneaking suspicion that this episode is going to be long. So if you guys are not into long episodes, you probably already see that this is a long episode if it is, or I'm lying and we're going to blaze through it. But based on what I've heard from Joseph, Sir Joseph the First, that this might be a bit long.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we should go ahead and get on to the first song then.
Yes, there it is. Track number 1, aptly titled First Song.
Yeah, because it's the first song. And also, I'm going to start with some background information. I think it's also called First Song because this is like the first song he wrote once he kind of started to get clean. So it's like, not only is it the first song on the album, it's the first song of like a new chapter of his life, I guess.
Yeah, it's him getting off of the horse and hopping on a moped or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think I can see this guy riding a moped. But,
I mean, maybe. Who knows? Although he talks about driving trucks at some point. So
that's true. Just to be clear, on YouTube Music at least, all of the songs have in parentheses live beside them. Is that just because there's only a live recording of this album? I just felt like it was weird that they called it out in the metadata.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, and that's how it is everywhere. Like I think that's just how it is on the album. So there's Live the Dream and there's Die the Nightmare. And Live the Dream is with the band, and most of the recordings, I mean, I guess you can consider them live because I don't think they do a whole lot of like editing or anything. So I guess maybe that's where they're coming from. But then there's also on Die the Nightmare, it's essentially just this album, but it's just Pat playing by himself. So
gotcha.
He's doing like a solo thing. And then there's also another album called The Volatile Utopian Real Estate Market. And I think it's also another like, I guess, solo rendition of this album as well with some other tracks added on. So I guess they did live just to kind of differentiate between the several different versions, maybe.
Interesting. So this one, the first song, it starts off with him saying, "Okay, it's been a long, hard day," and then he kind of gets into it, and it's really folksy.
Yeah,
like he leans hard into it. It's almost kind of got this bluegrass vibe. There's some violin, some banjo, some accordion, the piano. It's just it feels very bluegrassy. There's even a backup singer, it seems, or a female vocalist that accompanies him on some of these tracks, which is kind of interesting. There's some very interesting, I guess, post effects used in some of these songs, like in this one where he says, "But so far that's impossible." There's this kind of echo in it, but it feels like a pretty like low budget echo effect kind of thing. Like instead of using an echo effect, you just like copy and pasted the clip a couple times or something and quiet it or something, which it works. I mean, it keeps the kind of raw punk feel, I guess, of the album. But yeah, it's a pretty like smooth, folksy jam song, and that kind of sets the tone for most of this album.
Yeah, we kind of went from the very core with our Pat the Bunny arc. We kind of went from the very core of like the punk part of folk do-it-yourself punk
Mhm.
to a middle ground with Wingnut Dishwashers Union, and now we're just pretty much straight up folk with like a punk attitude behind it, I
Yeah,
guess. But
it's very much on the more calm side, where
yeah, with
I mean, he's growing as a person, right?
yeah,
And everyone jokes that like older people don't like angry music, and they're not. They kind of like mellow out, and so it kind of like reflects that as well. I think.
yeah. I mean, he was shit. He was like early 20s, late teens when he did Johnny Hobo, and now by the time this album came out, I think he was mid 30s, just
Mhm.
almost 35. So like, yeah, there's a pretty big difference in him making his music, and he moved to Tucson for this, like, not for this album, but as a way to kind of get a good restart on his life. So he's kind of in a different crowd too, so maybe that influenced it a little bit.
That's very fair, and I think that's kind of touched on in the song lyrically. It's straight up like a rehab song
Yeah.
for Pat, and I really appreciate that to like start off the final chapter of this 5 week tour that we've been having. Just it's just like a nice, like refreshing kind of way to end things. I think this whole album is kind of in that vein. But the song to me seemed like he was kind of trying to integrate into quote unquote normal society, where he like mentions he's been paying us rent on time and he's living in the middle of nowhere in maybe like a small community, and just kind of like focusing on himself and trying to rebuild who he is as he's kind of coming off of the heels of who he was, I suppose. He kind of like he mentions that he's been dreaming for most of his life, and he implies that he isn't like sure that he's woken up from it necessarily, meaning
Hmm.
that he's starting to realize how unlikely it is. At least the way I took it was like he's starting to realize that his anarchistic utopia kind of thing was just a dream, and it's not something that's probably going to happen. And then he quickly follows that sentiment up by saying nothing's been quite the same since you shot yourself, which is a pretty big downer coming off
Yeah.
of that, I think. And he
Yeah.
talks about someone being a ghost, and this is what I messaged you about earlier today. I wasn't sure if
Oh, okay.
this was a metaphor for him like killing the old Pat the Bunny and wanting to find that kind of spark to kind of guide him back to his old ways. So he's kind of like looking for an excuse to go back to the way he was, or if he's literally just talking about somebody that died, potentially causing him to like rethink the way he's been living, which does come up later in the album.
Yeah, I was getting it confused. Sorry about that whenever you asked her earlier.
No,
Uh,
you answered the question.
oh, okay. Uh,
For context, I asked Joey. And maybe this is just because I've changed a little bit of how I've been listening to these albums, but there was a specific section of lyrics that I related this to, and I wasn't sure if it was on one of his past albums that we had discussed
hmm.
or if it was on this album. And that was my question to Joey, and he nailed the track that I was looking for. So
Well, cool. So I didn't misunderstand it. That's nice.
correct.
uh, and this song, he has like Pat's talked about a lot of this music, and in the timeline, this one is it's a good one to start the album, but it technically chronologically comes like midway through this album's timeline, I guess. Like the next songs kind of start from before he moved and made all these like choices and everything, kind of like leading up to it, and this was kind of like a midpoint to end the album. But like, yeah, so I think chronologically this would be a little bit, I don't know, maybe, but yeah, he does talk about like, I think the Nothing's Been Quite the Same Since You Shot Yourself was like specifically talking about someone who probably didn't get out of the life that he
Mhm.
was in. And I did find it kind of, I guess, cool that he was talking about he's been dreaming like forever, and that's kind of how you were describing a lot of that utopia and everything.
Right.
Like, just it was a good through line. And yeah, man, like he's this song, it's just the first time I heard it was huge because I was still very much like a in my own head, fuck everybody. Like I was still the lashing out type of person.
Hmm.
And then he comes out with this album, and part of me, I didn't want to reject it, I guess. And it's not I just wasn't quite there
Yeah.
yet personally. But I think seeing him write something like this, especially the part where, I mean, he's talking about, I've been making strange friends in the desert. They love Jesus and America too. It ain't as bad as it sounds. Someday I'll explain it to you. And just talking about getting out, seeing people that, I mean, like from the previous songs and albums and stuff, you can pretty much tell that he's an atheist or doesn't believe in a God, organized religion, and he's not too fond of America. But
Right.
him talking about like going somewhere new, meeting people with opposing views, and kind of just like being chill about it, as opposed to the burn it all, fuck everything, blow it up type shit that you would hear previously. Like, where he's just like, yeah, we're all different. It's not so bad. And I mean, I think here specifically he's talking about like AA, because he does reference like going to meetings and stuff several times. So I'm guessing that's what he's talking about here. But I don't know. I've been to several AA meetings, and this kind of, I guess, put it in perspective, because I was also the type of person to be like, fuck this. I don't care. Like, whatever. It's all dumb.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Hearing somebody who I know used to think that turn around kind of made me think like this is doable, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So I don't know your exactly like your relationship with Pat the Bunny and when you discovered him on your journey, but to see someone or to hear someone, I guess, that you look up to, and that you kind of that helped shape some of your worldviews, start to change their worldviews. I feel like that's got to be like kind of scary in ways and kind of empowering in others, where it's just like, wait a minute, he's like alienating me, but maybe there's something to what he's saying, even if it is so different than what I'm used to.
Yeah. And I think a part of that too, I mean, because he's always been kind of tongue in cheek and
Yeah.
like about even the views, whenever you could tell he really like meant it, or at least thought he meant it and everything. Like, so
Yeah,
maybe,
I've said many times in the past couple weeks that it definitely seems like he's self-aware of his views, and like you said, he's very much open to like criticizing himself for some of the views that he holds.
yeah, I don't know. This song was really just kind of like a kicker the first time I heard it. And still every time I hear it, I like, this is one of those albums that I kind of just have to listen to the whole album, because as soon as I hear it, I'm just ready to listen to the rest of it.
Yeah,
And
it's kind of refreshing to hear something that's so not just like anarchy, fuck the system things. And you don't want to hear more about alcoholism. You just want to like you're ready to experience the end point, the changing point in Pat's discography.
yeah, some would say I'm ready to listen to track number 2, more about alcoholism. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. We're killing it. Killing it 2 songs and we're already getting cocky.
Nice. Get ready for the fall, guys.
It's coming any day now. This one, it has a full-on like drum kit in it, which is nice. It doesn't have like a super high production value on the drums or anything, so it still kind of sounds a bit muffled and lo-fi, and maybe that's kind of what they were going for. And just, I don't know. This is the point where I noticed like the mixing on this album is kind of weird. There's a
Yeah.
lot of like it's very unpolished, I suppose, but it still strangely has a lot of like quality elements to it. It's just the balancing of it all, I think, is kind of off on this album, which it's not necessarily a complaint. It's just an oddity that kind of gives it its own character, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like they spent all their budget on like microphones or something, and they were like,
Yeah.
we want really crisp sound, but nothing's gonna be leveled correctly. And like, there's times where you can just kind of hear background shit. Like,
Yeah.
I had never, because I mean, I used to just usually listen to this song in the car, and I've previously in the past had not as good headphones as I currently have, or I'm usually doing something else. But whenever I'm really paying attention, there were several times listening to this album where I was like, is there just like a clicking in the background?
Yeah.
I'm just like, what's happening?
Yeah, there's definitely some like, I mean, I guess that's why we mentioned that the tracks all say live by them, and there is this kind of like live element to it, and that they're all probably just playing in the same room or playing adjacent to each other, I suppose, and it leads to some interesting quirks, I suppose, of it. I still don't really like Pat's voice at this point. But in this song specifically, I think it really fits well with the chaotic energy of the music. The bass in this song and really throughout this album stands out to me a lot as something that's kind of been lacking in the other albums that we've discussed, and it kind of feels like a natural progression of the production, I suppose, where there's a full band here as opposed to just him and a guitar and maybe one or two other like instruments sprinkled in, where it feels like this is more of like a refined pop like product, I suppose.
Yeah, I really like the bass. Like the bass lines on a few of them, it makes me wonder why it wasn't there in the past. Honestly,
Yeah.
whenever I hear it, and I mean, this is like we said, it's the sound of this album is a lot different. Just in
Yeah.
general, this sounds like I would honestly put this with other folk albums if I was going to classify it. But it's like this is what like I like about folk music, and just like I don't know how to describe it. I feel like folk and punk, like people are out there hearing like folk punk and they're like, what? That's like, that doesn't, those, like, that's weird that they would be together or something. Like, that's usually the reaction that I at least used to get whenever I would talk about music like this. But I feel like the ethos behind it is a lot of the same. Like, they're kind of, there's a lot of folk music that you think of like Bob Dylan or like Pete Seeger or just like Woody Guthrie or people like that for back in the day, where it's like they're the counterculture, they're going against the man. And then you have punk, which is essentially the same thing, just louder and with distortion. And so I feel like it's a good mix, and I feel like it just works really well. Like Pat's punk aesthetic and sound that he has with his voice and with just kind of how he is works really well with the more folksy thing. Yeah, he does do a lot of like cleaner vocals so on this album. So I kind of expected the same criticisms, I guess, from like Wingnut Dishwashers Union.
Mm-hmm.
But
I feel like I don't harp on it nearly as much on the
I feel like he refined his voice a little bit, but it's still like there's definitely some times where you can still hear like a voice crack in there, or like he's not quite hitting something, or it's kind of.
I do agree. I do think his voice is better on this album overall than on the Wingnut Dishwashers album. At some points in this album, maybe even I praise his vocals, but we'll get there when we get there. Lyrically, this one, track number 2, it seems to be more reflective or critical of his past life of being this kind of like reckless alcoholic asshole that just kind of hates everything and hates everyone kind of thing. I like a lot of the individual lines of the song, and really throughout this album his lyric is pretty great. I like it, but his delivery, especially on there's a section where he says, "Oh shit, I wish I had a job to quit. I wish I had a boss I could tell to fuck off, give me satisfaction of the dramatic exit, and not just a long car ride and a short goodbye in a parking lot." That really stood out to me, because I think that like just that section kind of boils down his past experiences and how he just wanted so hard to rebel against things without necessarily having a reason other than the satisfaction of rebellion. And instead of really like having that satisfaction, he was just riding around wasted and high, and then he'd just end up in the same place he started, which was the parking lot. The parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the parking lot. But yeah, you hit it. Like, I love the lyrics on this whole album. This song is chronologically the first one. It's kind of like, I think this song is as he's realizing who he is. I guess he's kind of having the thoughts that like, shit, I'm this person. And I mean, there's like definitely themes of like a defeatist mindset where he's thinking, I don't know, like, I swear on my last cigarette that I love you, my darling. I'd love you if I could, but since the day I was born, it's been too late for me to be anything but what I am tonight. And what I am is drunk, what I am is mean in your passenger seat. Where he's talking about like, I don't know, like my whole life has culminated for me to be this person, and I don't think I can be anyone else. I don't think I'm meant to be anyone else. And but he's realizing that like something's got to change in this, and maybe it's a little bit before he realizes that whenever this song is set, but I don't know. I like the realization in this song because I felt like the person in this song, and it's nice to have that that out of body experience where you're realizing
the
like,
kind of reality check.
yeah, you're like, I can't be this person. Like,
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. It's not good for anybody. Like, it's just, it's pointless, really.
Yeah, it's got this like you said, this kind of like nihilistic defeatist kind of perception where he says, I finally love you enough to stay away, kind of thing. So he's realizing that, like, look, I'm a shitty person, and I think the best thing I can do for people is to stay away, because at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to change, and eventually I'm going to die because we're all compost and training. You know, we're all just going to rot away in the ground, and the best thing I can do is to not be around you when that happens.
Hell yeah. Track number 3, We're All Compost and Training. Side note, one of my favorite song titles.
It's a good song title.
I just love it so much. And just to go with the song, because so More About Alcoholism is kind of more, it's I guess you could say on the punkier side of what this album gets to. And then this one scales it completely back to like a slow, folksy banjo intro.
Yeah.
Where it just kind of, I don't know, it's I don't want to say ballady because it's not, but it's just slower and more emotional, kind of. There's an accordion that comes in to accompany it. It's like a slow jam where it's really, I guess, more about the vocals and the lyrics than anything.
I definitely agree. And there's actually there's like a brass section in this one as well that kind of comes in between some of the verses for just a little accent, little teaser of some trumpets, perhaps.
Hell yeah, the trumpets later.
Trumpets
are just so good.
It's so like, this album specifically is way more like progressive, I think, musically, than the other 2 albums we listened to by Pat the Bunny, because there's so much depth, there's so many different instruments, and it all kind of like flows better, I suppose, than just like a bunch of guys just jamming together, which obviously nothing's wrong with that, but it feels like a more polished product as a whole, I think, because of just the different instrumentation and how it's used.
Yeah, it makes me, because I mean, I know, I guess that they like practice these songs a lot together, but I definitely feel that where it's like, what I liked about some of the other albums is that it totally just feels like you could have just been at a party and it's like, hey, you know how to play this, we all know how to play these instruments, let's just fucking jam, like let's just write some songs and play some songs. And this is like, it has a purpose, I guess.
Yeah, which is maybe also representative of Pat's mindset coming into this, where like the song, at least lyrically, seems to be like the moment of clarity that we kind of hinted at in the last track, where this is like he's realizing that his old habits aren't really helping anyone or anything, and he didn't really have a goal or a purpose in his actions outside of just existing in some state of anarchy. I really like the section, again, towards the end of the song. Maybe it's just a theme with me liking the way he ends it. He says, and if freedom is doing what I want, well, that means I gotta know what is. Wait, did I?
That's wrong.
I didn't copy that right.
Well, no, Genius is just wrong right there. So if you copied it from Genius, it forgets the word that.
Yes. So he says, and if freedom is doing what I want, well, that means I gotta know what that is, not just what it isn't. So I'll dig up the dirt and I'll throw down some seeds, because the world needs more spinach, not more motherfuckers like me. And that to me is like, he's realizing that he was kind of aimless before in all of his anger and rage and again, being against the man, that he didn't really like, he didn't have an idea of what he actually wanted. He only knew what he didn't want. And what he didn't want was structured government, I suppose. So it's kind of refreshing from me, who's been complaining this whole journey about people not really having a reason to rebel other than just to rebel, that he's seeing that. He's kind of like, he's ready to participate in making something positive out of it. In this case, he's planting spinach, because spinach is what the world needs.
Yeah, spinach is good, man. All you people out there, don't sleep on spinach.
Yeah, go watch some
literally, literally or figuratively, don't sleep on spinach.
I mean, I'm sure you can sleep on spinach as a nice little pillow every now and then.
Yeah, but it would kill the spinach. Like,
well, I mean, presumably you would have already picked the spinach if you were sleeping on it. You're not going to go sleep on like a live spinach plant, perhaps.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't be able to eat it
Yeah,
if you
but I
slept on
mean,
it.
if you're sleeping on a floor, you know,
Yeah,
might as well throw some spinach under your head.
I guess that's true. But I'm glad you pointed out that line, because that line has been like huge in my life. That if freedom is doing what I want, then I got to know what that is, not just what it isn't. Like
Yeah.
the first time I heard that, because I was just coasting through life essentially at that point, and it's like thinking you're free because you do all this shit. You're getting high all the time. You're doing exactly what you want all the time, and you're living your life and whatever. And you're thinking that's freedom, but that's not freedom. Just railing against the irons, railing against the man, isn't freedom. Like just coasting isn't freedom. It's not doing anything for yourself. It's maybe doing what you want in the moment, but you're still at the mercy of your vices, like he talks about in the very opening.
Your entire existence is based on something else, someone else, something apart from you.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, I love the way he starts the song with, I want freedom, not a boss that comes in a 40-ounce bottle of anything. Like, where he's just like, he's like, I've been spending so much time going against the man that I had all these vices that I'm now being led around by, I'm now at the mercy of, and I'm not free. Freedom is making a choice for yourself and realizing that while it will take work to put in, it's worth it, because in the end you will have your freedom, and along the way you still have your freedom because you have made the conscious decision to do it. It's making a decision for yourself, not letting something else lead you around.
Amen.
And
I definitely agree.
One other thing that I saw, I didn't know, and I saw today that made me just so happy. So he's got a line in here. Just, I fucking love every line in this song. But he talks about, like, I'm just gonna read it because it's just fucking great. So the line is, I eat meat and drive trucks and shoot guns and don't trust in the federal government to solve all our problems. You might think I'm joking, but I'm not a Republican. Call me when your president pulls out of Afghanistan, because that's the day I'll get a cell phone number and you can call and leave a message on voicemail that day. So, like, just the whole, first he's playing with, like, I mean, talking about how, like, the typical Republican tropes, like, you're eating meat, I'm driving trucks, I'm a man, I shoot guns, and, like, whatever. Like, if Second Amendment, if the government tries to take away my guns, I'm gonna fight them, and it's gonna be a civil war, like that type of deal. But that's just like, just because you do all those things doesn't make you instantly believe in a Republican mindset. It just means that you eat meat, you drive trucks, and you don't view guns as a bad thing. But the part that I was surprised by was, so he says, call me when your president pulls out of Afghanistan, because that's the day I'll get a cell phone number. He apparently held true to his promise.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask about that.
I saw a picture of a tweet. It's from February 29th, 2020. I guess we pulled out of Afghanistan then. It just says, a promise is a promise, and then has an actual phone number. So that's awesome. It was just like something cool to see, because I don't know.
Because I mean, it gives some integrity to what he's saying.
Yeah.
In the songs. And granted, like, obviously he has changed a lot over the past decade or two, and obviously he's still allowed to change and not necessarily agree with things that he even said on this album. So, like, I'm not saying that he has to uphold that promise, kind of a thing, but I agree. It's a nice touch.
Super cool.
It gives meaning to the song.
Yeah, it really makes him the type of person that I would follow from here to utopia, whatever utopia he's dreaming of.
Which probably talked about in the next track of the album, which is conveniently called From Here to Utopia, with a subtitle, Song for the Desperate.
Yeah, this one starts like a 3-song run of Song for the Blank.
But I gotta tell you, I really like this song.
Fuck yes, dude.
Musically and lyrically. Also, it's the longest. I think this might be the longest Pat the Bunny track we've talked about.
I think
across
it is.
all 3 albums. It's a pretty long song. But yeah, this one, it has a bit of a darker tone musically from the other like bluegrassy, folksy tracks, and it almost has this kind of like cabaret feel to
Mm-hmm.
me. There's definitely more progression to this song than in a lot of his other songs, and I think that kind of stems from, again, having an actual band to support him instead of just the guitar, where there's a lot more like depth to it. There's even like a guitar solo section, and there's a bridge, and then there's this really sweet like post-chorus kind of thing that happens that builds up some energy before the musical outro and another like solo section. It's just like musically all around, there's a lot going on in this track, which is refreshing from having prior 4 weeks of folk punk just being kind of like not really samey necessarily, but simple.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of stuff going on musically. At least changing. I mean, you wouldn't hear it and be like the technical wizardry.
Yeah, no, yeah. I would not consider this like a prog rock song,
Yeah,
but relative to his other stuff, it's very progressive.
yeah. This definitely feels like the big song whenever taken into context, I guess, of the whole story of it, of just the arc of Pat the Bunny in general, which I keep saying Pat the Bunny, and I mean, he writes all these songs,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely shout out to all of the musicians
For sure.
that are with him. Like accordion, who I believe she's also the backup singer, Nikki Berger, and piano, Wyndham Maxwell. I shouted out an album, or yeah, an album last week, I think, about one that Pat the Bunny did with somebody else about being like a preacher and the devil in a southern town or something. Wyndham
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell, he's the other guy on that album. It's just them two. And that's my weekly other rec. It's called Big Swamp Gospel. Everybody go listen to it, and it's
Hell
really
yeah.
good. But yeah, just a lot of other good musicians really stepping it up and bringing to life this extremely powerful song.
I agree completely.
Hell yeah.
It's a long song. It's a big song. It's got a lot of sound. I wrote a lot of notes
Go for it.
for the lyrics, and by that I mean I copy and pasted several different stanzas of lyrics
Hell
in
yeah.
this one. So generally though, like similar to the previous track, this one seems to maybe take place with Pat being at some party, getting high and drunk, and hanging out with quote unquote like-minded people on the surface, having this kind of complete and honest drive to tear down the man. But on the inside, he's starting to doubt what he's saying and what he's doing, and he's kind of realizing that his anger and his rage has been kind of like empty and meaningless, and that's not really the best way to bring about change, right? He's been having all of these actions, right, where he or words, I suppose, where he's going out to places and being like, yeah, fuck the man, let's all get drunk and high and talk about that shit. But this is where he's like starting to really doubt it and starting to like second guess what he's doing.
God, dude, this whole fucking like, I essentially just, this is where earlier I messaged you and I was like, you're gonna have to like hold me accountable
Yeah,
because I was just writing like elaborations on every single lyric.
yeah.
I was just like,
I wanted to. I realized that was going to happen, so I didn't elaborate on a lot of the lyrics with my own thoughts. But there are sections I might as well read them. I mean, it's a long song,
yeah,
but so there are sections of lyrics that I liked. For example, the first one I called out is he says, "I'm too hopeless to look for a solution. I'm afraid that if I found one, I'd be out of excuses for the way I waste away in the gutters that I chose." Which I think that stands by itself very well. I think that just nails it for me. Then later on, he's quoting somebody else that's talking to him, and he said, "You think no one's gonna stop you from dying young and miserable? You're right. If you want something better, you got to put that shit aside." Which obviously had a big impact on him and probably informed a lot about this change. And I think that's a very great quote as well. Also shouted out that he says, "Now I'm not saying that we can't change the world, because everybody does at least a bit of that, but I won't shit myself. The way I'm living is a temper tantrum, and I need something else to stay alive." Which again, just great lyricism
hell yeah,
all around. And it's again, it's really diving into that self-reflective where he's realizing that what he's doing isn't sustainable. And then the last section of lyrics that I called out, he says, "I know it's hard to give a shit sometimes, but promise me we'll always try, because I don't want to hate you, and I don't want to hate me, and I don't want to have to hate everything anymore, which is just, it's beautiful.
It really
This song is like this is what I have been railing about for the past 4 weeks, and just the change that I would like to have seen in Pat the Bunny, and here it is.
God, like it's just, it is so good. Like, and maybe some of this is bias on my part, but like I just feel like this song, this whole album, but this song specifically, just like all the parts you pointed out are just like the perfect way to sum up personal change, and I think even invite it in other people, because he's not even necessarily like, he's still holding to his guns. Like he's not saying like we shouldn't try to change anything. He's not saying I've been completely wrong this whole time. He's been saying this whole situation that we've gotten ourselves in isn't doing anything, and we're just kind of destroying ourselves for nothing, aimlessly, and that's not gonna do anything. He's like, we need to break out of that, and if we want to have any change, we need to actually do something that will bring about change. But just getting drunk and high and not like isn't gonna do anything. Like the third verse, where he's talking about, I've seen the best minds of my generation dying drunk or high from the rooftops to the parking lots, or stomped to death in West Philadelphian squats, where he's just talking about like, yeah, these are some great people, but they're not doing anything. Like we sit here and we talk about like all these great things, but they're just dying from addiction, from from just nonsense. And
things that they theoretically can control.
Yeah. And then he goes on, they've got me waiting on a day when we can say fuck the police with a little bit of integrity, when it'll mean I've got your back if you've got mine. Like that right there, I feel like sums up the whole, you gotta like think about what you're saying, because you can just rail against the man, say fuck the man, fuck the police, like,
but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's gotta mean something. There's gotta be like something behind it, and if you want to have any integrity, it's gotta end up meaning like, okay, well, we not just fuck the police, we want a place where we can at least do something. Like, I've got your back if you've got mine is a much better sentiment than just yelling fuck the police with nothing behind it. Like,
I agree completely.
Oh God, it's
a great song.
Yeah,
all the way through.
We could go on forever and ever. I do want to point out one other thing that it just hits me hard, because it's a I guess a point that I've had. So the second verse, where he's talking about he's been listening to Minor Threat records all day, which Minor Threat is a band. They're like a pretty hard punk band from like the 80s, and he's talking about knowing every word. He's then goes on to describe he's singing along as he ties off, like he's about to shoot heroin, and then he goes, and Ian screams he's out of step as I throw the cotton into the spoon, draw up into the syringe. I'll know just what he means until I hit a vein. So Ian MacKaye, the singer vocalist for Minor Threat, he was the first straight edge person, really, and he kind of had the same thoughts that like, look, we're all in this punk scene, but we're all just getting fucked up and not doing anything. We're all just killing ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's pointless. So the straight edge movement was about that, like keeping your brain clean and your body clean so you can actually affect change. But
instead of just numbing yourself to it all, which is essentially like shooting up heroin, getting drunk all the time. Like you're not fixing anything. You're just numbing yourself to the world as it is because you don't like it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I can understand the sentiment behind that, but yeah, it doesn't get you anywhere. Like, because he goes on, the rest of that verse is describing like why he's doing it. But after that, I won't have to bother with knowing who I am for a while, at least. In a moment, the whole world is going to melt around me, and I'll swear I don't miss it as I lie to you tonight, because the lying is kind of a theme throughout here, where he's talking about, in the first verse, he's like, won't you tell me we want something more than just more beer? And if that's not true, just lie to, like, Won't You Lie
Yeah,
to Me Tonight.
because this is him at the height of just like just being intoxicated all the time and not really wanting anything out of it, just wanting to be angry, I suppose, without actually wanting a better solution, kind of thing, which is a theme that he fortunately seems to have kicked.
Yeah, man. If it's just so great. Like if I were listening to this song out on the road, I'd just keep listening to it over and over again, and I'd just never be coming home ever.
Wow, you could probably sing a song for the guilty about that one.
Oh
Like track number 5, Never Coming Home,
my
song for the
god.
guilty.
I didn't know how we were going to break out of that, but I'm glad.
But you did it. You did
Yeah.
it, man. We're getting there. This one, it slows things down a lot and kind of goes to like a slow, soft waltz deal, which is kind of fun, kind of different, stands out a bit. At this point, I noted that like I think I might be over his voice at this point, but I really don't like the mixing and recording method used because like I don't know, I feel like in a lot of places it's kind of echoey and you can almost like hear the booth or whatever like sound treatment he has going on while he's singing, like it's bouncing off of like a backdrop or something and back into the mic, which kind of makes it I don't know, it sounds weird to me and not like nearly as polished as the rest of the production would kind of feel.
Yeah, it's weird. Like his vocals they always sound like filtered or
Yeah,
echoey, and not in like a reverb way. Yeah, it is just like an echoey way, like, which I mean lends itself to the DIY feel.
mm-hmm.
But what, like you said, whenever the rest of the instruments are
Very
crisp
clean. Yeah,
and clean, it's kind of a weird. Like I don't get off put by it, but I can definitely see like it's something that even I notice.
yeah,
So, but I do like the trumpet that comes in here. Just kind of I just like the trumpet anywhere it comes in on this album, but
yeah.
it helps the kind of, I guess, sad feeling of this song.
I agree. Lyrically, I feel like this one's written. This one I wasn't sure how the whole like the death and because the themes of death and ghost kind of come up a couple times throughout this album, and so I wasn't sure. I felt like this one was maybe written from the perspective of a friend that overdosed or something, with the setting being down south in a desert, which matches that of first song, would also match the kind of ghost theming as well in first song. So like I was thinking maybe Pat moved down south to be near his friend and party with him, but then his friend overdosed and the song is kind of describing that situation. But I was like, well, it's also possible that maybe this person is somebody that Pat felt guilty for, which is alluded to in the song title and the verse where he says forgiveness from those that we hurt in this world never was guaranteed. And so maybe like felt responsible or got him like hooked on heroin or something, and that's why when he did inevitably overdose, it kind of affected Pat in the way it was.
Yeah, I definitely think because there is a lot of guilt. Like he's in. If you want to do some homework, there's a lot of other albums by Pat the Bunny where he talks about stuff like that. This song specifically, he has talked about it being he is the ghost person.
Gotcha.
He's the shitty person, but that's not to say that you're necessarily wrong in him feeling those feelings, and I'm sure that just comes
Right.
through whenever he's writing this because yeah, like it's not just you doing shitty things and it affecting other people. It's you getting other people to also do shitty things that then affect the people that they love or can even affect you. It can come back to bite you in the ass whenever maybe you get better and that other person hasn't or just never will because
Mm-hmm.
they're going to die. But yeah, this song, it's just generally about regret, knowing that there's some things that you can't come back from. There's some things that you can't make up for, and that's just kind of how it is whenever you live the life that he lived and make the choices that he made.
Which most of which were not great
Yeah.
in the context of his life, I suppose, where it seems like he's making better choices now, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's definitely a changed man. He's like I'm pretty sure he started doing shows again, but yeah, in 2016 he kind of retired because he was just like, I'm not I'm not necessarily on board with the whole like I don't really believe in my beliefs don't line up with I guess this scene anymore. So he
Yeah.
kind of
He
backed
he
out.
got to a point where he realized that he was kind of just being a parasite living off of other people, and he's like, you know what, like that's not the real intention behind punk and the punk movement, right? It's not just being a vampire, because vampires are just posers, you know.
Yeah,
Instead
and
of
they're
doing
all
anything, they're just living off of someone else.
yeah, and they need to write songs for the living. And that's also track number 6.
Hell yeah.
Song for vampires are posers, song for the living. I fucking love this song, so you can go ahead and say whatever you're gonna say about
Good.
it.
I didn't write a lot of notes for this one. This one, it kind of goes back to the more rocky sound. It's got some more distorted guitar and upbeat drums than a lot of the bluegrassy stuff on the album. There's this kind of cool beatboxy breakdown section in it that I really enjoy, and I like his vocals over it. The vocal melody that goes over that kind of beatbox section is kind of cool, and then the trumpets really almost push the song in like a ska punk direction.
Yep.
And I'm totally down for it.
Hell yeah, I'm all for the trumpets. And as soon as you said the beatboxy, like now that's just gonna be stuck in my head, just because God, it's just so good. But
it's an interesting decision.
It is an interesting decision, and it works. Like I feel like I don't know, that usually tends to be what happened. Like something just changes entirely. Like everything changes up. Most of his songs are pretty samey, I guess, throughout. But then the ones that do change up really stand out, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But lyrically, this song is, God, dude, it just, it just hit me. I mean, I keep saying this over and over again, but it just hit me. The chorus hit me so hard whenever I heard it the first time, where the chorus is, so I won't, but we shall overcome someday. I can't do it alone, but I shall be free someday. I don't know how to live, but I'm sick of learning how to die. Vampirism is for posers in junior high. But that I don't know how to live, but I'm sick of learning how to die is like, I don't know, a point that you just hit where you're just like, I'm fed up. Like I'm done. Like, yeah. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but I know that whatever I'm doing right now is not what it should be.
Yeah, especially living the way he was living around a lot of like drug addicts and stuff. I'm sure he's seen a fair share of his friends die. Yeah. And he talks about it throughout this album, just like knowing people that have died, like you mentioned in the other one, where there were great people, the greatest minds of his generation or whatever, that had died because they were addicted to drugs and they couldn't get off of it. And it's kind of like that's eye-opening, right? Seeing all of the people you care about start to die because of the lifestyle that they choose, which is also the lifestyle that you've been choosing. Kind of realizing maybe there's something here that I shouldn't be doing if I want to live. But that's another thing that I think is a big theme, is him making that decision, where as previously it was maybe like, I don't care if I live or die. This album kind of marks the point where he's like, you know what, fuck that, I do want to live. I don't want to die because of the drugs that I'm addicted to. So I'm going to make a better decision and try to improve my living conditions.
What a choice too. Like and I know it seems like the natural choice, but it's hard to make sometimes.
Oh, agreed. Addiction is a hell of a thing. It's not something that you can just choose to quit most of the time.
And even without addiction, it's hard to choose to live. Like,
yeah, that's true. I mean, it reminds me, that quote of "I'm sick of learning how to die," or "I don't know how to live, but I'm sick of learning how to die." To me, maybe it's just because of the time period. It reminds me of Porter Robinson's "Nurture," where the last song is trying to feel alive, and it's even without the drugs and stuff, like you were saying, like it's hard to kind of overcome general depression and decide that you want to make something of your life, especially if you've been, quote unquote, coasting, right? Just kind of like existing, being content, to make the decision to be more, to be happy, to want to do things instead of just sit around and let life happen to you. It's hard.
Yeah, it is really hard. Like there's ballots and barricades everywhere trying to prevent you from living the life that you want, but you got to just break through them.
Breakthrough straight to track number 7 of Ballots and Barricades.
Man, so going back to shitty metadata that I had, the first download I ever downloaded of this album, somebody made a big typo, and this song was called "Of Hallets and Harricades," and
How does that even happen?
I just took it at face value, and I was like, "That's weird."
Hallets and Harricades. All right.
Maybe
there's some symbolism to the letter H that he.
Yeah. Or maybe it's just kind of close to the letter B on the keyboard.
Yeah. Strange to make that twice. We were actually talking about that earlier today, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, typing is hard, guys. But
brains are weird. Of Ballots and Barricades, it's track number 7. This one most resembles, I think, the older Pat the Bunny stuff that we've listened to. It's got like a prominent acoustic guitar, and the only other real instrumentation is the accordion that comes in, just to spice it up a little bit, I suppose. But even his vocals on this one sound more like his older, angrier kind of stuff. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I totally like the vibe of it. Just kind of how it's in the middle of the newer sound, and going into the lyrics, because there's not too much musically to say, but I like the direction he takes with the lyrics here. So he's getting political again with this song, but he does it in a way that he's almost like advocating to kind of go within the realms of this, like the system. Like he's talking about like voting and stuff. I mean, he starts at, I got Arizona residency one day too late to vote on this election day, and every year before I've been too drunk to register. Then I'd say I don't believe it anyway, which kind of like, right there he's poking at himself, where he's like, in the past I just would get too drunk, couldn't even vote, and then I'd just write it off as I don't believe it. But then he goes on to just straight up say, there's no ballot we can cast to set us free, but there's no brick we can throw that will end poverty, and we can't blow up SB 1070. Talking about like, you can only physically change so much. You can't physically change a law or physically fix systemic economic issues. You can only do that through at least somewhat going through the proper channels of voting and getting politicians that will maybe pass laws that you like. As long as there is a government, that's kind of the best way to fight those issues.
Yeah, it's interesting because he kind of also contradicts that a little bit. First off, I do agree with that. I mean, that's kind of what I was harping on back on the Johnny Hobo album, where he's talking about like destruction and I kind of mentioned that doesn't really do anything. Throwing a brick through somebody's window just pisses them off. It's not going to change anything, and he's directly acknowledging that, it seems. But he also kind of contradicts that whole sentiment a little bit. So he says at the end, so vote November 2nd if it seems right to you, or don't vote if you think it just holds us down. Just tell me what we're going to do on November 3rd to make sure there's no government left to elect 2 years from now. So it's kind of like he is, in a way, I suppose, encouraging people to vote, but it's also more just like, I don't care how we get there. I don't believe I don't believe that I should tell you to vote because the system is fucked, and I don't blame you for not wanting to vote because it's a shitty system, kind of thing. What I care about is making things happen in order to assure that we don't have to do this again, kind of a thing, just to get rid of the government in 2 years. So if election is the way we do it, let's elect someone who's going to get rid of it, kind of a thing.
Yeah. See, I agree that it's kind of contradictory. The way that I've taken it, at least at times, is where he's saying, or don't vote if you think it just holds us down. Then he says, just tell me what we're going to do on November 3rd to make sure there's no government left to elect 2 years from now. Was kind of like, to me, an invitation to be like, okay, if we're not voting, then tell me what the plan is.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not going to vote, tell me what the other option is.
Yeah, regardless of who gets elected.
Yeah.
Just let's get something together to deal with it.
Yeah. Which, I mean, yeah, the whole not having a government thing, I can get behind ideas of it, definitely. Like, I don't think you can really have a society at large to have absolutely no governing body of any kind. But I definitely would advocate for more power in the people's hands.
I agree.
Than
I also have another complaint with the lyrics of this album,
Go for it.
and it's not necessarily like the hypocrisy, the contradicting himself or anything, but he says at some point, since there have been laws, there have been criminals, there have been thieves, since there's been property. And I don't know, something about that irks me a little bit, because it kind of implies that laws created crime and theft only happens because people own things, which is technically true. But the alternative would be that the crimes would still exist. They would just be quote unquote legal, right? And nobody would have anything for their own if they didn't have any property, which it doesn't fix the issue, right? Those things, theft would still exist. Criminals would still exist. They just wouldn't be illegal, quote unquote.
See, so how I've taken that is laws are kind of not necessarily arbitrary, but a little exclusionary. Like somebody is setting the laws who has their version of what they think is right.
Yeah.
And then there's people who may not agree with that, and they're just doing things, they're living their lives. But the laws that are put in place by the people who don't necessarily agree with the way that person's living their life makes that person a criminal, is how I've taken it. Not necessarily.
I think that's fair. Maybe I was too literal with my interpretation of it, which is a flaw that I think I have in general, is taking things too literal, which is maybe why I've never been a lyrics guy. But
well,
I think that's fair.
And then the thieves, there have been thieves since there's been property. How I have always thought of that is that, like, so of course, saying that, like, if I have a TV and saying that there wouldn't have been a thief if I didn't necessarily claim this TV as my own, then they're being like, oh, there wouldn't be thieves if I had never owned the TV or something. But, like, I think of it more as
thieving for survival, perhaps.
Yeah, and, like, if people had enough, everybody had enough to exist, then not necessarily that there wouldn't be people trying to steal, but it's like, I don't know, I think of more like time theft from a job, or like people with excess. If people didn't have excess property, then there wouldn't, I don't know, people claiming things that shouldn't necessarily be theirs, and then people trying to take it back because they're like, no, I don't know. It'd be like if an Amazon worker was like, you know what, Jeff Bezos, today I scanned 8,000 packages or something, and I know how much money that earned you, so I'm just going to take that from you because I earned it. I earned it for you. And, well, I didn't earn it for you, but I'm the one who did that work, so I'm going to take it back. Kind of like, it shouldn't have necessarily all been Jeff Bezos's in the first place, so he's trying to just take it back, which it kind of goes back to the property is robbery thing.
Yeah, which I still haven't looked into. I need to make a note to actually do that.
And there's also, apparently there's more to that quote, which I saw earlier but didn't keep, like, it was like property is robbery, property is freedom, and property is, there was another one that kind of all went together, but I don't necessarily remember where I saw that. But apparently just property is robbery is not the entire quote.
Yeah, I figured that was the case. But yeah, I feel like that sentiment is, I mean, it's communism, right? I mean, which is, I'm not going to discuss neither here if it's a good or a bad thing. Like, there are pros and cons of everything, I think. But I don't know, it to my literal brain, saying that, like, if we didn't have property, then theft would go away. It was just like, it was kind of like a red flag that kind of irked me. It's just like, that's not true, because then if we couldn't own anything, then why would we work for anything? Why would we do anything? Like, I guess it's going back to that anarchistic utopia that I don't think can be obtained, where everyone has enough, that way they don't feel the urge to take from somebody else, but then nobody's really claiming anything, and nobody feels responsible to or driven to do things, to achieve things, right? Because I mean, it's the American scheme, right? Is we're capitalists, and we put a lot of value in the things we own. So maybe there's a bit of brainwashing going on for me, but like, without that, if the world was in a perfect state of harmony and utopia, to where we didn't need money, we didn't need things, then like what would we do? Like we would just exist and we wouldn't want things, I suppose, and that feels bad to me.
Well, you know what? Maybe you're just a bitter old man, Jeremy.
I am definitely a bitter old man, and I'm definitely going to try to talk about track number 8, Bitter Old Man, next.
Hell yeah. I fucking love this song too, man. Like, shit, dude. But this one starts out slow again with the full band, banjo, accordion, guitar, bass, and all. Throughout most of the song, nothing really changes up too much. But then near the end, the music kind of picks up, gets a little bit faster and more punky, and the vocals get a little bit harsher, and it kind of ends on a I guess not necessarily more upbeat note, but a higher tempo note where it's like there's more energy here.
Yeah, it's more rocky.
Yeah.
I agree. I did not say anything further than what you have said on the music.
Yeah, but what about the lyrics? Because
this
you're a lyrics man now.
Yeah. I kind of feel like this one kind of goes full circle with Pat, where he's wanting to return. The way I took it is that he's kind of wanting to return to the naive optimism of his kind of like past anarchistic views, but the difference being now he's a little bit less cynical about it. He's ready to accept that living a more quote unquote normal life isn't as awful as he used to believe it would be. But I don't know, it felt interesting that he was kind of like, I mean, maybe it was just him like still believing in the core of anarchy, and like you kind of mentioned in the last song where he's finding ways to live a balance between the two, of acknowledging that he still wants this anarchistic utopia, but he acknowledges that he has to kind of deal with the system that's already in place in order to survive, I guess, in a sustainable way.
Yeah. Is this one, I mean, it starts off, talking about, which I didn't even know. Apparently in Catalonia in 1936, there was a Spanish Civil War where before that, I guess, anarchists just ran part of Spain. And then there was a civil war where like fascists took over or something. And that's kind of where it starts, where he's talking about he was born a bitter old man who was still resentful that the anarchists lost in 1936. But the main reason I like this song is just the young association that he has, like in the chorus where he's talking about, I always wanted to die young. Now I feel younger every day, and I just hope I die younger than I am. Where he's talking about, like, I don't know, when he was a kid, he was just like, fuck it, I'm going to live fast, die young, like very much had that lifestyle. But now that he's actually trying to better his life, he's like, I feel better than I ever have, and I feel younger, and now I hope I just keep feeling younger until I die. Instead of, he still wants to die young, but just not of old. He wants to die young at old age.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting double meaning, where he's like, it's him acknowledging that he doesn't actually just want to die anymore, right? Where he always wanted to die young, and he's feeling younger every day, but he's hoping to die younger. So if he's progressively getting younger theoretically as time goes on, then he's pretty much saying like, I hope I die in the future. I don't want to die anymore. I want to die some point in the future where I'm going to continue to get young. I'm going to get younger and younger and younger and younger and younger for the rest of my life. And I want, pretty much to me, it seemed like he was saying, I want to die of old age kind of thing, by saying that he hopes to die younger than he is, which is kind of a fun contradiction, I suppose.
Yeah. And it's something that he kind of did in From Here to Utopia, where he's talking about, when I was young, I drank too much, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel so goddamn young tonight.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is a cool setup, because in that instance, he's talking about young being like drunk and super fucked up, and he's still in that mindset. And now he's like, no, young
means healthy.
Is healthy and good, and it feels nice, and I want that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, you can feel healthy, and you can feel your heart, beating inside of you.
Yeah. And did you know your heart is a muscle the size of your fist?
I did not know that, but I did know that fact is the title of track number 9.
your heart is a muscle the size of your fist.
Exactly. That was an alley-oop. I set you up for it. I hoped you would take it, and you did. This one, I didn't have a lot of notes on the music, but it has some very solid progression to it. There's a definite change of tone and mood throughout of it, and it kind of like feels optimistic in ways that are a little unexpected.
Yeah, this
I guess
one is
not unexpected, as in the progression of this album's lyrical content clearly seems to be going in that way, but musically it felt more optimistic than a lot of his other music.
Yeah, it in the overall scheme of Pat the Bunny that you've heard, it's probably pretty unexpected to hear an optimist, like a fully optimistic. Which I mean, I guess I can't say fully. There's bittersweet moments, I guess. It's not all like sunshine and rainbows, but
for sure.
So Dahlia, the first friend that he recognizes in this, I'm kind of just skipping the music because it's cool music, but it's more bluegrassy,
worth talking about more.
But Dahlia, she made, I guess, a poster, a print of "Your heart is a muscle the size of your fist. Keep on loving, keep fighting," which is like the chorus of this song, which is just a really, I feel I would recommend this song to anybody who, bar one verse, anybody who's going through some hard shit and just kind of needs a different outlook, I guess, because it is optimistic at times, and I feel like it does a really good job of like relating, and Pat the Bunny is a guy who can relate to, I would imagine, most negative emotions that people would be feeling. But yeah, this song, it's just such a good feeling to hear like Pat talking about his friends who are still with him and who
went on to do great things.
Yeah, they went on to do good things, and it's like he's just trying to be better, where he's talking about in Never Coming Home, he's talking about all the regrets that he has of the shit that he can't make back up to people because he's done bad shit in the past. And this one is like he's talking about really dedicating himself to positive change, the people that he holds close to him, and acknowledging that he needs to fight to keep moving forward and bettering himself, just not only for his benefit, but also for the people around him, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very, very wholesome song, except for the one section that is kind of out of place, I suppose, in the context of the song, but maybe not in the context of the album, I think. I really like the chorus and the title of saying your heart is a muscle the size of your fist, because it, to me, at least within the context of this album, is kind of symbolic of the capability, or the capacity, I suppose, to love being equal to the capacity for violence and hatred, kind of a thing, because a fist is a symbol for like rebellion and fighting, kind of a thing, and heart obviously being a symbol of love and compassion and happiness and stuff like that. So it's kind of a fun contrast, but also kind of tying them together and saying that like you gotta find the balance between the two, instead of just railing hard with your fists and not really having the heart for it, which is I think that balance is something that Pat is trying to find throughout this album.
Yeah, and I think he's getting there. This is just kind of a generally, I mean, there's definitely parts that aren't hopeful, I guess, but overall, I think this is a good, maybe, redemption album, which is kind of why I put it at the end of this arc, even though I know there's, like, this album came out in 2011. Pat was still making music up until 2016. He's even had some solo albums where he's talked more about these issues, but I felt like this was a good cap, because it was kind of like, it in a movie of Pat the Bunny's life. I feel like this would be the climax part where he's like, okay, he's turning a new leaf and shit's gonna be better from now on.
I agree. I do like your choice in doing so. I think this was a very great journey. Not that we're at the end of it just yet, but I noted that, like, at least from a lyrical standpoint, I feel like this is the best possible ending track for the album. This is not the last track of the album, to be clear, but I felt like this is the good end credits scene for the movie, with first song part 2 being the next track, that it felt more like an epilogue as well, but it also kind of all ties back in. But yeah, the one part of the song that we haven't mentioned directly, that we've been kind of teetering around, is the second verse. He amidst talking about his friends and the positive things that they've done, he starts the second verse saying, Ian built a cabin in the woods to live in. For years, terrifying noises kept him up at night with a 12 gauge under his pillow. He's living in Boston now, going to art school. I forgive him. Hell, I'll admit it, I'm proud of him. That's not the verse I thought it was.
But it goes to
it's an
show how
illusion.
he's talking about his friends and everything.
Yeah. Where is it? Somewhere in here he talks Chuck.
It's the third verse.
I found it. He talks about Chuck, which was his friend that came over to his house. He said he needed somebody to take care of his pets because he was going out of town. I asked him where, and he said New Mexico. I asked if I could get a ride. He said, no, you don't want to follow me where it is I'm going, which is the lyric that I was asking Joey about earlier in the day, because that stood out to me, I guess, when I was listening to it. But it goes on to say that was the last time we saw him because he drove straight to his parents' cabin and put a bullet in his head, which obviously not the best best inclusion, I suppose. But maybe it was intentional, because he talks up all of his friends and he says, yeah, like they're doing great things with their lives. And then it kind of, the last friend that he talks about is one that maybe didn't get out of whatever rut that they were all in together. Maybe he didn't give himself the chance to thrive. And maybe this encouraged Pat to kind of change the person who he was. And I was kind of wondering if Chuck was the person that I was referring to earlier in the album with the ghost person kind of a thing that we talked about, because I mean, driving to New Mexico is a pretty like barren, deserty state. And if Pat the Bunny was kind of moving to like a deserty state with nothing but sand around, then New Mexico would kind of fit in. This was before I realized, or before I knew, that he moved to Tucson, which also makes sense for a deserty thing. But it kind of like, it felt like Chuck was maybe the breaking point, where he's seeing all of his friends doing good things, and then he sees Chuck kill himself, and that's kind of like eye-opening in ways, saying like, I have a choice to make. I can either end up like Chuck, or I can end up like the rest of my friends and actually do something with my life.
And I'm glad he chose the one to keep fighting.
Me too. If you are, again, I don't hate that we do this. I hate that we always end up talking about suicide on the podcast, I guess. But again, if you have any of those thoughts, if you think your life can't get better, this song is a great example of how it can. I mean, if someone like Pat the Bunny was able to change his life so drastically and be proud of his friends for thriving, you can do the same. If you absolutely don't have anyone you can talk to about this, give a call to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 1-800-273-8255. They will talk to you. They'll hopefully be able to help you rationalize what you're feeling, which isn't an easy thing to do, but it is possible, and good things can come from that.
Great things can come from continuing fighting, because it is a fight, but it's worth it, I'd say, to keep going. Because I don't know, you can never realize anything that you want to do if you stop. Like, I don't know, it's
there's always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be that fight. But like Pat acknowledges throughout this album, and in like Bitter Old Man, I think he talks about struggling and how he's still struggling, but he's not struggling and also being in prison at the same time. Whereas like, obviously, like you need to, things might not always be great, but they could always be worse, unless you kill yourself, in which case things will never be any worse or better, because that's the end of your story, and that's a shitty way to go out.
Yeah. Also, not to abruptly change the subject, but where he's talking about, I asked him where, and he said New Mexico. I've always just associated that with the New Mexico song from Johnny Hobo, because it opens up the Love Songs for the Apocalypse album, which is just the New Mexico song. And it's always made me wonder if that song was about just, I don't know, a suicidal person. Like, I don't know if New Mexico is a place, like it's just kind of his code for that, because in that song there's like a guy who's driving extremely drunk and fast and just living on the edge. But it's always
That's
just
interesting. I didn't even make that connection. But yeah, maybe it is some more like symbolic for him being New Mexico is just the other place.
well, you already said the title of the next track.
Yes, and
So
also the title of the first track, the first song.
part 2 though.
This is part 2 though. Track number 10. It's the last song, also first song, part 2. This is the epilogue that I mentioned last in the prior track. It starts with like a train whistle, which is kind of cool and unexpected, which kind of ties into the whole hobo theme that he talks about throughout this album and also other albums, just traveling by train. And the postal system, I think, was mentioned that they made their own postal system using the trains. But yeah, starts off with the train whistle. The intro guitar and the vocals sound pretty lo-fi, like they were kind of like maybe a demo or recorded live, and then the rest of the song kind of starts and it kind of carries the more produced sound as the rest of the album. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit to include. And then towards the end of the song, similar to which song was it? One of the songs, Bitter Old Man, I think it was, had a kind of a big tempo shift or a tone shift, and it towards the end of this one, it also kind of like it shifts down, and it kind of like lets the mood sink in a bit better.
Yeah, it's so where your heart is the muscle the size of your fist. It would be a great ending. I like this one just because it's kind of like, I don't know, it puts a nice cap on everything where you see him, because this song is set a year after first song part 1, where he's officially like gotten clean and gotten his act together. So it's kind of like at the end looking back, like an epilogue, like you said.
He's been telling the story this whole time, and now we cut to present day, and he's sitting on a porch telling the tale to a group of people or something.
And man, I know I keep saying this, but I just fucking love this song. And it's like, I don't know, just even from the first verse, as someone I have never, like I've said before, I've never done like super hard drugs like heroin or anything. But just as a person who has been severely addicted to things in my life, I understand the sentiment entirely of, he says, I took the needle out of my arm about a year ago today, and every day since then, I've been taking the needle out of my brain. So when I'm staring down at my hands, I can't explain just what it is that I'm thinking of, except thank God that all my veins have to pump as my blood. And it's like the thought that addiction is something that sticks with you, and it really never leaves. You're all like, from the moment you become addicted, then even if you get clean, you're
not cured.
Yeah, there's no cure for it. You're never gonna necessarily wake up and not have an innate craving for what you were addicted to. It may not happen some days, but it's like, for me,
it's
my
a
main
lingering thing.
Yeah, like my absolute main thing that I'd say I was like 100% extremely addicted to was cigarettes, which doesn't sound like it's not like I wasn't like physically addicted to like heroin or anything or pain pills really, but
yeah,
there were other things too, but I'd say the main through line for me has been cigarettes. And
I think it should be treated just as well. Okay, maybe not just as severely, but I think it's a big change that's interesting over at least the course of my lifetime, seeing that like in the 80s, cigarette smoking was considered the cool thing to do, and even into the 90s that kind of prevailed. But I think throughout the last decade or two, we've seen this kind of shift to where a lot of people still do smoke, but it's less glorified in at least like marketing, and you don't see as many quote unquote cool guys smoking cigarettes.
Yeah,
it's not cool. It's not healthy. It's not a fun thing to do.
And it never goes away. Like that's the one thing. If I could go back to whatever 14-year-old me and be like, okay, so you're going to start smoking these Black and Milds, I'm going to tell you at a certain point that's going to switch to cigarettes, and at a certain point you're going to want to stop, but your body is not going to let you.
Yeah.
And every time you pass a gas station in a car, your natural reaction is going to be to turn into that gas station and buy a pack of cigarettes to smoke one. Every time you smell it out in the air, that's immediately going to be the first thing that pops into your head. Every time you see it on TV, that's going to be every time you feel a nice crisp fall breeze, you're
Yeah.
going to want to smoke a cigarette because of how nice it feels. You're going to like, it's just, once you hit addiction, it's never going to leave you. And I feel like just the opening verse to this so purely hits it, where he's talking about looking down at his hands and thinking, thank God it's just my blood in there, where at least you can look in the mirror and be like, thank God all I'm breathing is air, or thank God whatever your addiction is.
Yeah.
At least you're putting in the work, and it's helping. If as much of a struggle as it is, it's a good thing that you're doing. It's a good fight that you're fighting.
I agree. I also really like that opening verse. It stood out to me even before. That was another thing that, like, Joey and I joked about when I was asking about lyrics, about me being a quote-unquote lyric guy now, because so many lyrics stood out from this album to me even before sitting down to do my notes. Normally, I don't think about the lyrics. I don't really pay attention to the lyrics, or definitely not like try to remember any lyrics. But there were several lines throughout this album that really stuck with me, even before sitting down to write them, and that every day since then I've been taking the needle out of my brain really stuck with me. And granted, I haven't been quote unquote addicted to anything more severe than like caffeine, so it's not nearly on the same level, but I think it's fascinating. I think it's good poetic work, I suppose, the way he phrases it.
Man, I wonder if Pat's out there writing poetry instead of music now.
I mean, it's basically the same thing, right? Music
I guess that's true.
Just poetry, or I guess songwriting is just poetry with music in mind as well.
Well, and then the second verse. Not to keep. I just looked at the time.
Oh,
I
it's
had not
fine.
looked.
We won.
Okay.
We can go as long as we fucking won.
Okay. So he's kind of owning up to all the shit that he's said or done in the past, where he's like, I've done you so much wrong, I can't believe you'd still talk to me, and I say so much bullshit, I can't believe that anyone around me can breathe. And then I know that it's a little dramatic, but the word for not changing is death. So I'm getting better, my friends, but please don't hold your breath. Like, he's owning up, like, I've made and broken so many promises in the past.
Mhm.
I've said so much shit that, like, there's no way that I can reasonably expect you to believe anything that I'm saying, but realize now that I'm doing this for me, and hopefully you can see my progress, but don't, I guess he doesn't even necessarily have the faith in himself to be like, yeah, expect this from me. He's like,
Yeah,
just
he doesn't need the pressure of people saying, like, waiting for him to slip up and then judging him for it, kind of a thing. Which is I think that in itself is also a theme. Like, that's one of the big takeaways from the end of the song, or from the rest of the song, where it seems like he's not only no longer doing heroin, but he finds comfort and faith in people, whereas before he was more of just like pessimistic and everybody sucks and hating everything, where now he's like he mentioned, I think, in part one of the song, that he's making friends, right? He has a consistent group of people that he doesn't hate. He's not stealing from them, he's not using them, and they're not using him, and he's just kind of finally finding a place in quote unquote society, whereas previously he was a hobo and very against that kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's quite the transformation, and one that I'm very glad to hear and have not necessarily been a part of, but to have. It's just cool to hear it in music.
Yeah, it's inspiring.
Yeah, you get to actually
realize that, like, no matter where you're at, you can make a change for the better. You can get out of those kind of like situations and those kind of ruts, I suppose.
Yeah, it's very inspiring.
Yeah, he doesn't completely change.
Yeah,
who he is. I mean, he's still very much, I think, at heart as an anarchist, and even in the song he talks about, he says, as long as there is law, peace will be a crime, which obviously is a very like anarchistic view, which again, I don't necessarily condone, but he's clearly like put a lot of more thought into his words and wants to actually do something about it, and it's a positive change. Thematically, I like this album overall. I think it's a good like happy ending to this journey that we've been going on. I'm not like, I would not consider myself a fan of folk punk music. It's just not like a genre that I would seek out to listen to. But I think maybe, just maybe, I won't die on the inside if I hear another folk punk song out.
Hell yeah.
And I definitely have a different like perspective, I suppose, for Pat the Bunny, and quote unquote Joey music, where I'm not as cold to it.
Well, that's nice to hear. And to add an even warmer, fuzzier note to it, apparently this album was produced by Charlie Schneeweiss, who is Pat the Bunny's dad. So it's cool that his redemption, I guess I keep saying redemption, it's not necessarily a redemption album, but the rehab turning your life around album was produced by his dad after he kind of chose to leave home at the beginning of, I guess, all this, and now he's back produced, and he even played the trumpet. So
that's actually super cool. I like that. It's a very, very nice, warm, fuzzy ending, for sure. To be able to have that kind of a life, and I mean, especially because he talks about the guilt and admitting that it's hard to forgive people, and it's not required that people forgive you. When he kind of like, he had that betrayal of his parents at the very beginning of his life, essentially, and he's like, nah, fuck this, I'm out. And then to come full circle and end up where you're on such a level with your dad that he would produce an album for you and perform on the album it's really cool.
Super cool. Their whole family instruments. His brother Michael is in a band called, well, they were called Michael Jordan Touchdown Pass, but now they are called the Sad Joys. So they're not folk punk really. Their first album was kind of ish, but they're kind of chill.
Well, hell yeah. We've made it through 5 albums of folk punk. It was a fun journey. I thank you for guiding us through this and for giving some personal insights into it as well. I think it was fun. It was
yeah.
I was not hating listening to another folk punk album every week like I was maybe worried about at the beginning, where it's like, oh, here comes another folk punk. It's going to be the same shit.
Oh, jeez. I'm just ready for Paramore now.
I don't think the Paramore journey is going to live up to this, honestly.
What?
Like, it's we'll see when we get there.
Okay.
If we get there, but yeah, that was fun. Before we get there though, next week we're getting out of this folk punk rut journey. It's not a rut. That's a negative connotation. We're leaving folk punk behind for now, at least, and we're going to be talking about an album that I've not actually heard, called Satana Tarantula. What? by The Brains. The band is called The Brains, and I saw The Brains live in Louisville at some point for their previous record, which I was going to do. I was planning on doing Out in the Dark, or is that what it's called? I don't even know. Something like that. I think it was Out in the Dark was the name of their last album, and that's the one that I actually bought the CD after I saw them live, because I was like, this is cool, I'm into this, and it's going to be spooky week soon, so I think it'll fit in. At least their other album, Out in the Dark, had a good Halloween-y vibe to it. I assume that this album will, being called Satana Tarantula, it'll have some spooky vibes to it.
Hell yeah.
And it'll be new for me, so I apologize if it sucks, and you're welcome if it doesn't suck, I guess. So come back next week for that. We're going to be talking about it. If you have any final thoughts for our folk punk tour, or if you want to share how you feel about the things we've discussed in this episode, in the last 5 episodes, whatever, shout us out in some comments, send us some tweeters. I know there's a lot of popular Facebook posts going around. It's like, hey, tag an artist and see if they respond to you. If you tag FeedbackLoop on any of those, I'll respond to you, probably.
I'll respond too. We'll both respond separately.
But yeah, come back next week. We're gonna be talking about The Brains, Satana Tarantula. And until then, I suppose, stay in our feedback loop.
Bye.